Russian President Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine hasn't exactly gone according to plan in 2026. Having subjected Ukrainian cities to a murderous bombing campaign that caused major power and water outages for millions of residents throughout a bitterly cold winter, he was looking forward to pushing on with a major spring offensive. But that offensive has, to put it mildly, stalled. During recent months, Ukraine has pushed back. Not only has it stopped the Russian offensive in key directions, but according to a growing number of sources, it has in fact recaptured significant swathes of territory following unprecedented victories. At the same time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's campaign of long-range sanctions, meaning long-range drone and missile strikes deep inside Russia, has intensified, as has the damage they are inflicting. Things are clearly heating on and far behind the front lines, especially under Russian backsides. Here are the latest developments and what they tell us about where the war is headed. In his regular evening address on Friday, May 22nd, Zelensky stated that Ukrainian positions on the front line have significantly strengthened in recent months. Indeed, Ukrainian positions are stronger now than in previous years. Since the beginning of the year, 590 square kilometers, around 228 square miles, of our territory have been liberated and brought back under control. The trend is definitely not in the occupiers' interests. We continue to increase the rate of destruction of Russian personnel. This, together with sanctions in all forms, is forcing Russia to choose diplomacy, he said. Also on Friday, Bloomberg reported on a newly declassified U.S. Defense intelligence assessment that put the amount of territory recaptured at around 154 square miles since February. A few days earlier, the Institute for the Study of War had put the amount of recaptured territory at around 44.8 square miles in April alone. Taken together, these numbers suggest that the rate of recapture is increasing. The Economist's war tracker corroborated Ukraine's advances, reporting that small but significant advances had been made throughout 2026 to date, the largest since 2023. That's fair, given the scale of the effort required for Ukraine to liberate all of its territory currently occupied by Russia. It's hard to put an exact number on the amount of that territory. However, it's generally considered to be roughly a fifth of Ukraine's total territory, around 45,000 square miles. So, 154 square miles in 4 to 5 months is a good start, but there's a very long way to go yet. A large part of the difficulty in precisely mapping areas of control is that the front lines change daily. That's inevitable given the scale of operations across the approximately 680-mile-long line of combat. In 2025, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported that 61,605 combat engagements had been recorded over the year, at an average of roughly 169 battles per day. The most intense day of the year was November 28th, when 311 combat engagements with the enemy were recorded. The widespread use of drones has also meant that dozens of miles behind the most advanced positions on either side have effectively been turned into kill zones, where any movement is potentially fatal. As a result, both sides have largely abandoned traditional offensives based on columns of armor. Instead, both sides are primarily operating with small groups of insurgent infantry, who are often able to penetrate miles behind enemy positions. There, they can dig in and defend these positions technically behind enemy lines, with delivery of supplies and ammunition taking place by drone. So, in many parts of the front, while one side may have control in the main, in reality, the situation on the ground is much murkier. They don't call these areas grey zones or covered in the fog of war for nothing. You're probably itching to know where exactly Ukraine has advanced. Well, the exact territory recaptured by Ukraine in these various reports hasn't been precisely specified. To a large extent, given the fast-changing grey zone characteristics of the current front lines, identifying precise areas of control for any significant length of time is a fool's errand. That said, the ISW assessment did specify several more broadly defined areas where advances were made. Starting in November 2025, the Ukrainian Defense Forces liberated a large portion of Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast. Through the winter and spring of 2026, they reclaimed over 154 square miles in southern Ukraine, and since late April 2026, they have retaken several settlements in western Zaporizhzhia Oblast. As you might expect, the Russians report a completely different story. A month ago, on April 21st, Russian Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov claimed that Russian forces had taken control of 80 settlements and more than 1,000 square miles of Ukrainian territory in 2026. In March and April alone, he said that Russian forces had captured 34 settlements and about 270 square miles. As for specifics, Gerasimov claimed that the captured territory includes the last remaining populated settlements in the sliver of the Luhansk Oblast still controlled by Ukraine, with geolocated footage appearing to corroborate this. He added that Russian troops are advancing on multiple fronts, establishing what he described as a security zone in Ukraine's Sumy and Kharkiv regions. Approximately 15 settlements were taken in those regions in March, he claimed, with the Kharkiv regions of Vovchansky Kutry and Zaybin added in April. He also claimed the capture of Reshaping and Pavlivka in Donetsk Oblast, and Boykov, Luhivska, and Vasilyanka in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, among other advances. The ISW immediately smacked these claims down. They argued that his latest claims are not supported by open-source evidence or even by pro-Russian military bloggers. Even the most generous estimates from Russian sources, it said, suggest Russian troops may have advanced or infiltrated no more than 276 square miles into Ukrainian territory since the start of the year, just over 40% of Gerasimov's claims, and that some of those claims are questionable. By ISW's own count based on open-source data, Russian forces had advanced just 147 square miles and captured 13 settlements from January to April 21st of 2026. Since March 1st, Russian troops had taken only 2 settlements and had actually lost 23 square miles across the front, they said. ISW also said that Gerasimov had inflated Russian gains in several other sectors. He claimed that Russian forces had moved to within 4.35 miles of Kramatorsk and 7.45 miles of Sloviansk. But even the most optimistic Russian accounts place Russian troops at least 5.6 miles from Kramatorsk and 8.7 miles from Sloviansk. Those ranges would still put the 2 cities in range of drone strikes, which appears to be the case. Together with the embattled city of Konstantinivka, the 2 cities form the last heavily fortified axis of populated territory in the Donbass still completely under Ukraine's control. Still, the ISW concludes that Gerasimov's exaggerations are likely an attempt to mask what it called the Russian military's disappointing lack of progress in its spring-summer 2026 offensive. In fact, as a result of Ukraine's successful counterattacks, ISW said Russian forces have had to scale back operations in several sectors because of heavy losses. These attacks, combined with steadfast defense, have forced Russian troops to spend more resources simply to keep up the impression of steady advances across the front. Simultaneously, they assess that mounting losses and slower recruitment are threatening Russia's familiar tactic of sending repeated assault waves and infiltration groups into battle at high intensity and high cost. But that was a month ago. And as we know, a lot can change in only a month on the battlefields of Ukraine. Currently, there's one region where military bloggers from both sides seem to agree that Ukraine is making some serious headway. Western and southern Zaporizhzhia, including the Russian-occupied lands just to the south. The main thrust of the Russian offensive in Zaporizhzhia over the past year or so has been in the east, where the Oblast borders the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and Donetsk Oblast. Having largely dislodged the Ukrainians from the key city of Huliapol, they've been trying to inch their way toward the last large town in the south of the Oblast still under firm Ukrainian control, Kharkiv. But the real prize in the Oblast is in the far west, Zaporizhzhia. Here, in a stop-start campaign characterized by huge losses from a relentless Ukrainian drone massacre, they managed to eventually grind northwards up the M18 highway. Eventually, they managed to capture parts of the town of Stepnohursk and approach Pavlivka. Securing this area would provide the springboard to attack Primorsky, Malokatranivka, and Vasilyanka, the last major settlements before the outskirts of the city. First, the Ukrainians thwarted the offensive, and now they're pushing back hard. The Ukrainians have, by all accounts, retaken Stepnohorsk completely and are busy clearing remaining pockets of resistance in Pavlivka. Next up, or down, to be more precise, since they're heading south, is Kamiansky. If the Ukrainians can take Kamiansky, the road lies open to the crucial town of Vasilivka. Russian analysts are biting their nails at the prospect. Taken together with other developments in the area, they fear this Ukrainian push might be part of the build-up to a much more serious situation, the recapture of Enerhodar, home of the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. This NPP is one of the most hotly contested places in Ukraine, and a major stumbling block in all attempts so far to thrash out a peace settlement to end the war. The Russians seized it during their initial invasion in 2022 and have subsequently.